It is the AEMT lecture series. Welcome back. This will be video number 1 for Chapter 8 review of the inflammatory system. It's an important topic. It's along with immunology, which will more than likely be a separate video. But we're glad to have you. Why is this important? Well, first thing is it'll help you to understand an allergic reaction if you can follow along and understand how the inflammatory system works. The second thing is, if you're dealing with a patient who has pneumonia or is septic, if you'll pay attention and try to get something out of this video, you'll be able to see what is going on at that cellular level, and it'll actually help you to treat the patient and their symptoms. So that's the second reason. Now, it's probably not everybody's most favorite topic, and it's probably to some it might be not interesting, but I think it's very interesting. I love how the body responds to a invading type pathogen. So the plan is I'm going to take you through the inflammatory process, and I'm going to use like a pneumonia type bacteria, and we're going to show you what happens, how the body responds, and then as we go along, describe the symptoms and why you have the symptoms that you have. So it hopefully be interesting to everybody out there. Everything that I'm talking about is in the book. So it's part of the curriculum, and it's something you need to know. You could get questions on this on registry, and so you need to be familiar with it. When you're coming up with a diagnosis, it'll help you. To know what's happening at cellular level will help you in diagnosing the patient. It'll help you to come up with, a secondary diagnosis. So it's just, I can't say it enough how important it is to understand this. All right, so let's just get started. But first, let's define what inflammation is. So inflammation is tissue damage that initiates a set of vascular and cellular events that are designed to clean up any type of cellular debris or pathogens and initiate repair. So what some ideas that can cause this inflammatory response? Well, we could have physical trauma. It could be chemical trauma. It could be burns. And again, it could be a pathogen. It could be an infection. So that's where we're at. So let's get started. And so let me start with drawing out our pathogen. Okay, there's our pathogen. Here's our antigen. And they usually present like this. Okay, so there is 2 requirements for the inflammatory system to be activated. Okay, 2 requirements. The first is, they call it immunogenesis. And basically what that means is it's got to be capable of an immune response. So we have to be able to activate an immune response. Okay. And it has to be reactive. And what I mean by that is this. So let's look at poison ivy. All right. So poison ivy by itself, it's not a pathogen. It's a plant, right? But it's when you touch it, it mixes with proteins in your skin, and it's that combination that causes a pathogen. And so your book calls that a hapten. It just happened, no, but for real, it's called a hapten, Hapten, hapten. And that's the definition of a hapten. It's not necessarily an antigen, but can become an antigen at a later time. Okay, let's erase this. And then let's talk about our antigen that's here. So this antigen is going to produce something, and that something is called endotoxins. Endotoxins. All right, and so it's those endotoxins that's going to come along, and these are like skin cells. They're called epithelial cells, and they have receptors. And when this stuff starts meeting up with the receptors, it starts causing trauma to the cells. Okay, trauma to the cells. And so this is going to set off a host of events. So you have your endotoxins that are floating around here, and it's going to generate an immune response. And so what I'm going to draw out next is a mast cell. Okay, so we have our mast cell here, and our mast cell has receptors on it. Okay, mast cell has receptors. That's pretty much with this pen the best I can draw it. And so these endotoxins are going to be received by the mast cell, and it's going to produce a host of things. All right, let's see here. Okay. All right, so let's go with the first one. And it's probably one of the most important ones. And it's called histamine. And you're probably familiar with histamine. I've mentioned it several times. And histamine, we have a drug. It's called an antihistamine. Does anybody know what that drug name is? That would be Benadryl. Okay. Next, we have, it's going to make, so let's, leukotrienes. All right, we got leukotrienes on board. All right, and then something else called prostaglandin. All right, so we got some prostaglandin. We'll talk about these and what they do. And so I'm not going to put anything extra in here. This is just stuff that's it's in your book. Not adding anything to this. It's all relevant. Okay. So before we talk about these, let's go back over here to the skin cells. Now, these skin cells, since they're being damaged, they're going to put off some chemicals too. They're going to put off more leukotrienes. And more prostaglandins. Okay, there we go. So prostaglandins and leukotrienes. All right. So what's going to happen here? All right, so if we go up here to the blood vessels where the blood cells are, okay, or vascular system here, and we're going to come up here, and everybody is going to want to follow us because we're cool like that. All right, and so here we are. Blood vessels are receiving this chemical response, and they got to do something. They got to do something. They've received it. The mast cell here has released all of this. We've got more leukotrienes and prostaglandins released from the skin cells. And so what is going to happen? All right, so let's get our bearings. Let's see where we're at. Remember here, this is the blood vessels and the cells. And so what do we have here? We have plasma here. Now, draw some of these little guys in here. All right, so what's going to happen is this. When histamine, leukotrienes, prostaglandins come up here and meet up here, they're going to meet up here with the plasma. And the first thing is we're going to get a couple more chemicals involved. All right, and a couple more chemicals involved. Then we can talk about what we have, what kind of chemicals we're dealing with. All right, so your book calls this the renin. Hang on, let me get a different color. I'm sorry, not renin, the Kennan system. Okay. And what's inside that system? Well, what we have is something, a protein. This protein's called kallikrein. Kallikrein, K-A-L-I-K-I-R-E-N. All right, don't worry about it. It's just going to change names. Okay, it's going to change names. I'm going to put it down here because we got to talk about it. And it's called bradykinins. Bradykinins. Okay, cool. Bradykinins. All right. So, with all that said, histamine, leukotrienes, prostaglandins, bradykinins are going to come up here. They get picked up by these receptors here, and it's going to cause the blood vessels to respond. Remember, blood vessels, what are they made of? What are blood vessels made of? Well, we have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle. Okay, and so how's this again, you're waiting. You're dying to know how this is going to affect. So it's going to cause our blood vessels to contract. Okay, so they're going to contract. All right, they're going to contract. And so what I mean by contracting is just that, but it's going to pull these guys apart. And let me get my eraser here. It's going to make these guys wider. Okay, it's going to make them wider. And so how do you think that's going to affect things? What do you think's happening by making these guys wider? Okay, so what's happening is these vessels are dilating. These vessels are dilating, so they're becoming larger. Good thing or a bad thing? It's both, actually, believe it or not. It can be looked at both, bad and good. Bad and good. All right, so here we go. It's a little wider. But you see these gaps? There's gaps now. And in these gaps, these vessels are becoming weaker. And what is that called? So they've contracted. So let's write dilated, because that's what they are now. They're dilated. All right. And now they're leaky. And what's a better way to describe leaky? So if we want to sound like we know what we're talking about, we can say it increases permeability. Okay. So remember our plasma's in here? So what do you think is going to leak out? Blood cells, plasma. I hope you said plasma, because that would be right. Plasma is going to leak out. So let's bring our plasma out. And so what is that going to be called? When the plasma leaks out of that blood vessel, what is that called? Edema. Okay. All right. Now, so blood vessels are dilated, they're contracted. We have edema coming out. What is that going to do? Well, when we have edema, and that edema now is in the extracellular space. Okay. It's in the extracellular space. We have these receptors in that extracellular space, and they're pain receptors. So all that edema is being pushed down on these pain receptors, and we're going to have pain. So let's talk about signs and symptoms of increased inflammation from an inflammatory response. Let me see if I can write them down here maybe. All right, so 1, we're going to have edema. We've said how that happens. 2, we're going to have pain. Okay, we said how that happens. All right, 3, redness. Okay. So we've got edema, pain, redness, heat. We're going to have heat. And then the last one is joint immobility. Immobility. That's probably misspelled. I hope not. Joint. That is because I don't have a T. Joint. Joint immobility. So let's talk about how. So we explained edema and we explained pain. How about the redness? So what happens when these vessels dilate and this plasma dumps out? Plasma dumps out. How does that make the skin look? It makes it look red. Makes the skin look red. What about the heat? Well, one of the functions of blood is to have temperature control. So this blood plasma that's being dumped out is warm, and so that heats up. That heats up the area, and all the edema causes those joints not to be able to move around. All right. Other signs and symptoms. Remember, this is a pneumonia type bacteria, so it's going to attack the lungs, but it doesn't have to be a pneumonia bacteria. It could be, any type of bacteria, but we have leukotrienes. And these leukotrienes are the ones that cause bronchial constriction. So bronchial constriction, all right, and also is going to cause bronchial spasms. This is leukotriene's really bad stuff. It's the same stuff that's released in an allergic reaction along with histamine. So same stuff that you would see in an anaphylactic reaction. All right, so that's where we're at so far. So bradykinins, prostaglandins, leukotrienshistamines. So let's talk about the next step. You remember when I said about the dilation, and it could be a good thing or a bad thing. The last bad thing is we're going to see, along with all of this, how will it affect our blood pressure, right? How will it affect our blood pressure? Well, excuse me, we're going to see hypotension, right? From this stuff. Hypotension. All right. So what about the good? Okay, well, here comes the good. Let's explain it. All right. So all of these little particles right here, you don't even need to worry about the name. Just understand the physiology. Please understand the physiology. It's going to cause these receptors to come up. These receptors are very aware that we're in trouble. Okay? They're like, hey, we're in a bad place and we need some help. It's kind of like the flag of help coming up. Throwing the flag up, we need some help. And so remember what we have floating around in the blood cells. Which one of these guys fight infection? Is it platelets? Is it red blood cells? Is it white blood cells? It's white blood cells. And so let's get specific. We say white blood cells all the time, but there's different types of white blood cells. Their job is the same, but they do their jobs a little different. And the first one of those guys that I'm going to draw up here is called a neutrophil. Sorry. I had to think about that for a second. All right, neutrophil. That's this guy. We have another type. Hang on. We have another type. I don't know if this one will be any better than the one I just erased, but we'll see. Maybe a little better. All right, this guy right here is called a macrophage. So what are these guys? So these guys have similar receptors on. Okay? And so let me draw them out and see if you could kind of start to figure it out. This pen, I'm telling you guys, this pen is killing me today. It kills me every day, though. All right. See if you can start figuring this out. Do these, and I know they're jacked up looking, but do these look like they will fit here? They do. They do fit there. All right. So what happens is these guys come floating along and they come in contact with these receptors. And it's going to grab these white blood cells. And why does it grab them? Because it knows it's being invaded. Okay, it knows without a doubt that it's got problems and it's being invaded. So, let me show you what's going to happen. Remember I said these blood cells are gappy now. So there's spaces in between. They're not as big as what I'm drawing. They're smaller, but there's still, nonetheless, spaces in between. It's going to grab these blood cells. And when it does, when it grabs these blood cells, these guys are going to start rolling. Okay, so they're going to start rolling like this. All right, and that rolling process has a definition. It's in your book. Okay, that rolling process is going to roll around here like that. It's called margination. Okay, margination. Now, there's other receptors on the sides. Sorry, I'm really trying to draw. Okay, look, see these receptors? All right, so what's going to happen is these guys are going to roll, and that's why the dilation kind of occurs. The dilation occurs so that this can happen. This right here can happen. It's catching these guys, and it's going to bring them down. It's going to bring them down in between these blood vessels and out to the extracellular fluid. Why do you think it's doing that? Okay, so the process of this, all right, the process of this, remember, this is margination when it catches it. When it sends it down like this, it's called transmigration or diapedesis. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to write diapedesis here. All right, this is diapedesis. Diapedesis. All right. It's doing that because where's our bacteria? It's down here. See the bacteria? Mast cell's already working on it. The mast cell's releasing chemicals and things like that, but the mast cell, it's not going to be able to take care of the problem. These guys, though, can take care of the problem. So let me come over here real quick and let me draw out our pathogen. Here he is. Remember, these are called antigens, and it'll be important for the immunology part later because we can use these to make antibodies. All right, so here's the endotoxins. So these guys get pulled out into the fight. They have to be pulled out into the fight. And so these guys get pulled out into the fight. Let's draw out our neutrophil. All right, and let's try to draw our macrophage. And we'll talk about these in the next video of how they're different. All right, and so what's important to understand on this is how do they find this pathogen? How do they know where it is? Well, you see these endotoxins? These guys are looking for this guy, and they're waiting to receive the message that it's there. And once they receive the message, it doesn't matter. Let's say these guys are going this way, and the pathogen's behind them. As soon as that happens, these guys are going to start migrating towards it. They're going to migrate back towards it. And that has a definition name. All right. And that's called chemotaxis. Chemotaxis. All right. So that's the process of being pulled in to the pulled into the pathogen. Okay. So some more stuff to talk about, and we're almost done. So can these two guys do it by themselves? They can't. There has to be some type of process that can signal other white blood cells and other white blood cells to come and help them fight this out. Okay, and so there is. So these white blood cells that are right here are going to produce something called interleukin. Okay, interleukin. All right, and tissue necrotic factor, TNF. All right, it's going to produce interleukin and tissue necrotic factor. And what that does is it's a specific signal to other white blood cells that, hey, come help us. We've got something and it's real. This is not a drill. We need your help. All right. And so there's this interleukin and tissue necrotic factor do two other things that we need to talk about. All right. And so let me get a black pen. That's me trying to draw the brain and the spine. Not working out too good. All right, so this stuff right here is going to head over here to the brain, specifically the hypothalamus, and do something really cool. You know why you have a fever when you're septic or when you have pneumonia or a bacterial infection? Because of this right here, the interleukin. Interleukin and tissue necrotic factor come over here to the hypothalamus and say, hey, we got issues. We got a bacteria. And so that produces the fever. And fever is produced because bacteria, normally they're very sensitive to temperature. And so if we raise the temperature above 98.2, sometimes that weakens or even kills the bacteria. So fever is produced for that reason. And then there's one other thing that these guys are going to do. All right, I don't know. They're going to come over here. This is supposed to be a bone. Into the bone marrow. Okay. They're going to come down here and signal the bone marrow to do what? So we've said it in chapter 8. This is where stem cells live. And if you need more red blood cells, stem cells in the bone marrow are going to make more of them. In this case, we need more white blood cells. And they live in the same place. So they're going to come down here and say, hey, look, we're in the fight of our life. We need you to pick up production on white blood cells. And so that's what happens. And that's all because of interleukin and tissue necrotic factor. Those also were mentioned in your book as well. All right. I'm checking my notes, making sure we said everything. It looks like we have. So let's just do a quick review. All right. So we have a pathogen, antigens on top, releasing endotoxins. Endotoxins are picked up here by these skin cells. This is a pathogen that does activate an immune response. We have a mast cell here. The mast cell comes along, picks up endotoxins, and develops a cascade of, and these are called, every one of these are called cytokines. Okay, they're going to cause changes in the cells. So the mast cell starts producing cytokines, and we have histamine, leukotrienes, and prostaglandins. The damaged skin cells produce more leukotrienes and more prostaglandins. Comes up here to the vascular area where we have our blood vessels, and mixes with the plasma. The Keenan system's activated. And then we have calicivin that ends up producing bradykinins. Okay? So bradykinins, prostaglandins, leukotrienes that cause bronchial constriction and all kinds of issues for your lungs, and histamines respond to the blood vessels. Blood vessels are made of smooth muscle, so they contract, they dilate, they become leaky, which means they increase their permeability. We have plasma then moving out into the extracellular space, causing edema. That edema right here is putting pressure on pain receptors. So we have pain. We look down here, we explained edema, we explained pain. Redness is caused from the dilation and caused by the edema as well. Heat is caused by the edema as well. And so is joint immobility. So those are all signs of inflammation and the inflammatory response. We come back up here, we see these receptors that come up. Their job is to catch the white blood cells that are coming by, that they start rolling. That's called margination. And when the white blood cells are pulled through the gaps and brought into the fight, that is called diapedesis. And once the white blood cells get down here, they meet up with the pathogen through chemotaxis. Once they do find the pathogen, the fight is on, and they produce interleukin-1 and tissue necrotic factor. Okay, that is able to signal other white blood cells to come join the fight. Then interleukin-1 and tissue necrotic factor start affecting the hypothalamus in the brain to initiate fever. And then from there to the red bone marrow to stimulate the white blood cell stem cells to produce more white blood cells. That is it. That is how it works, pretty much. So the next video we will cover more immunology, and we'll talk about how these white blood cells take care of the problem and hopefully produce some antibodies so that when faced with this again, we'll have some type of immunity. All right. See you next video.